Warning: this content contains descriptions of historical practices that may be considered explicit or disturbing. Imagine trying to ignite a spark of romance while your grandma snored 3 feet away. Your in-laws, right there, the family cow, practically a chaperone. Or picture this: your wedding night, not just public, but graded. Welcome to the absolutely unhinged, hilariously awkward, and often horrifying world of intimacy throughout history. Privacy wasn't just rare, it was a luxury only kings could dream of. Bathing? Optional. The rules? Stranger than fiction. Forget your dating app woes. Our ancestors faced challenges that would make you crawl under a rock. Today, we're diving into the most bizarre, the most invasive, and the most utterly insane ways humanity has managed to keep itself going. And trust me, after this, you'll never look at a locked bedroom door the same way again. Let's kick off this nightmare in colonial America, where young love faced an impossible dilemma. Courtship was essential, but privacy? That was practically witchcraft. So, they invented the bundling board, possibly the most awkward piece of furniture ever conceived. Picture this. It's 1750s Pennsylvania. You, a young man, finally get permission to spend time with your sweetheart. But there's a catch. You both must lie in the same bed, fully clothed, a literal wooden plank dividing you down the middle. An intimate Berlin Wall. Sometimes, for extra virtue preservation, the girl would be sewn into a sack up to her armpits. Yes, sewn into a sack. Parents would sit nearby, casually knitting or reading the Bible, their watchful eyes burning holes through the air. Some even tied the boy's ankles together or put him in a special courting bag, a sleeping bag from hell. But here's the kicker, the delicious, scandalous twist. This system had a roughly 30% failure rate. Turns out, horny teenagers in the 1700s were just as resourceful as they are today. Who could have thought? This bizarre tradition wasn't born of prudishness alone. Houses were freezing. Fuel was expensive. Families couldn't afford to heat multiple rooms, so couples shared body heat under heavy quilts, the blessed board between them. Historians have even found records of boards suspiciously worn down in certain spots, suggesting young lovers found ways to at least hold hands through convenient imperfections. In Wales, they had an even stranger ritual, Carew when Whaley, or loving in bed. With full parental permission, the boy would climb through the girl's window at night and spend hours talking to her while she remained wrapped like a human burrito. His test? Could he climb in silently? Could he keep his hands to himself all night? If so, he was worthy. A Welsh diarist from 1798 even recounted his future father-in-law helping him with the ladder, then shouting helpful advice from below. "Remember, boy, no touching, but do compliment her needlework." The Dutch in New York took bundling to another level of excruciating awkwardness with the quing tradition. Not only was there a board, but the girl's mother would sit at the foot of the bed, knitting, occasionally clearing her throat if giggles got too loud. One Dutch immigrant wrote home in 1680. "The customs here are most peculiar. I spent 6 hours discussing cheese making with my beloved Greta, while her mother watched us like a hawk. My legs were bound, and Greta was wrapped like a large sausage. Romance in the New World is different." If you thought bundling boards were weird, buckle up for ancient Rome, where subtlety was apparently illegal. Every March, Romans unleashed Lupercalia, a fertility festival that makes modern Vegas look like a church picnic. Imagine this insanity. Young men stripped naked, sacrificed a goat, then made whips from its skin. Still naked, covered in sacrificial goat blood, they'd run through the streets. whipping any woman who wanted to get pregnant. And women lined up for this. They'd literally hold out their hands, believing the bloody lash would make them fertile. But wait, it gets better. Roman wedding nights were a public affair. The bride was escorted to the bedroom by a parade of guests singing songs so obscene they'd make a sailor blush. We have surviving lyrics that would scorch your ears. The guests would then stand outside the bedroom, banging pots and pans, shouting advice and dirty jokes while the couple tried to consummate. One Roman writer penned a wedding song including the line, "Boy, give nuts to the children. Your days of playing with nuts are over. Now you must play with something else." This was considered appropriate. The Romans also had Fescennine verses, essentially ancient rap battles about genitals, performed at weddings. Professional poets were hired to create the most creatively obscene rhymes about the bride and groom's upcoming activities. The raunchier, the better the marriage was, supposedly. We have surviving examples describing what the groom should do with various vegetables. I'm not making this up. There's an entire verse about turnips that archaeologists still blush when translating. Then came Floralia, dedicated to the goddess Flora. Prostitutes performed naked in theaters, the audience throwing lupins and beans, supposedly boosting fertility. Regular citizens wore flower crowns and nothing else, dancing through the streets in what one Christian writer later described as a most shameful display of human rutting that would make dogs blush. The festival lasted 6 days. By the end, Rome was a giant, flower-covered orgy. Emperor Augustus tried to rein it in, but the people nearly rioted. He gave up and just moved his mother out of the city for the week. But perhaps the most insane Roman bedroom custom was the Iodomatromit Pronuba tradition. This was an older, married woman who would literally guide the bride's hand to touch the groom's genitals for the first time, in front of witnesses, to ensure she knew what she was dealing with. The pronuba would then give detailed instructions, sometimes with helpful hand gestures, and occasionally with carved wooden visual aids. One Roman bride, Julia Felix, left graffiti in Pompeii complaining that her pronuba brought a disturbingly realistic wooden model and spent 2 hours explaining techniques while her new husband stood there, turning various shades of purple. Now, let's talk about the Middle Ages, where the Catholic Church had very specific opinions about bedroom activities. Enter the Giut chemise cagoule. Possibly the least sexy garment ever invented. Imagine a massive tent-like nightgown with one strategically placed hole. That was it. Couples wore these to cover everything except the absolute minimum necessary for procreation. The church recommended it, believing that seeing your spouse naked would lead to excessive lust, a sin even within marriage. But here's where it goes utterly bonkers. The church had an official calendar of when you could and couldn't be intimate. Not Sundays, not Wednesdays or Fridays, fasting days. Not during Lent, 40 days. Not Advent, 4 weeks. Not Pentecost, not feast days. Not when the woman was menstruating, pregnant, or nursing. Do the math. That left about 44 days a year, when it was technically okay. And even then, it had to be in the dark, missionary position only, without enjoying it too much. One priest actually suggested couples recite prayers during the act to avoid sinful pleasure. Medieval penitentials, basically sin price lists, had incredibly specific punishments for every bedroom variation. Woman on top, 3 years of fasting on bread and water. From behind, also 3 years, standing up. 7 years. Because apparently, gravity offended God. One monk, Brother Gerald, spent his life creating a 200-page manual detailing every possible position and its corresponding punishment. The manuscript still exists in the Vatican secret archives. Scholars who've read it say it's accidentally the most comprehensive medieval sex manual ever written. The church was so obsessed they created special furniture to prevent sin. The procreation bed had a board with a hole that could be locked in place, ensuring only the approved position. Monasteries even manufactured these beds as income. A surviving receipt from 1287 shows the Abbey of Cluny selling 47 virtue preservation beds to the Duke of Burgundy for his daughter's dowries. They came with Latin instruction manuals on maintaining proper Christian modesty. But the absolute peak of medieval bedroom insanity was Yomumzir holy supervision. Some devout couples would invite a priest to sit in their bedroom and read scripture aloud during intimacy, just to ensure they didn't enjoy it too much. Saint Francesca of Rome allegedly had her confessor sit behind a screen in her bedroom for the first year of marriage, coughing loudly if he suspected excessive enthusiasm. Her husband, Lorenzo, later wrote that the experience was most effective in suppressing carnal desires, as nothing diminishes ardor quite like Father Antonio reading Leviticus in his nasal voice, while one attempts to produce an air. Speaking of weird rules, let's visit ancient Egypt, where things get genuinely bizarre. Egyptians associated lettuce. Yes, lettuce, with sexual prowess. Why? Because when you break a lettuce stem, it releases a milky substance. And ancient Egyptians thought, well, you can imagine. The god Min, deity of fertility, was always depicted with a massive erection and surrounded by lettuce plants. Pharaohs would publicly eat entire heads of lettuce before visiting their wives to demonstrate their virility. But the real insanity was Egyptian birth control. One method involved crocodile dung. Women would create a pessary, an ancient diaphragm made of crocodile feces mixed with honey. The idea? The dung's alkaline nature would kill sperm. Spoiler alert, it didn't work, and probably led to some very unfortunate infections. Even weirder, Egyptian men sometimes used a linen condom soaked in onion juice. Because nothing says romance like the aroma of onions and the constant fear of crocodiles. The Egyptians took their fertility rituals to absolutely bonkers levels. During the Festival of Min, the pharaoh would publicly masturbate into the Nile River to ensure the annual flood would be fertile. This wasn't symbolic. The pharaoh would literally stand on a platform in front of thousands, ensuring Egypt's prosperity. The crowd would cheer, throwing lettuce leaves. Pharaoh Ramesses II reportedly performed this ritual over 60 times. Priests even measured his output to predict the harvest. One papyrus records that in his 47th year, the measurement was disappointing, forcing them to import grain from Nubia. Egyptian nobility had conception rooms, painted with explicit scenes, designed to inspire fertility. The insane part? They believed the images you looked at during conception would influence your child's appearance. One couple spent their wedding night in a room covered with images of the god Thoth, hoping for an intelligent child. When the baby was born with a large nose, they blamed accidentally glancing at an ibis painting at the crucial moment. Archaeologists have found conception rooms with everything from acrobatic positions to scenes involving sacred crocodiles, hopefully just for spiritual inspiration. The Egyptians also believed certain positions could determine a baby's gender. Right side for a boy, left for a girl. Standing up meant twins. One medical papyrus recommends that if you want a boy, the woman should drink a mixture of honey, dates, and the dried penis of a bull, ground into powder. For a girl, mouse droppings mixed with beer. The same text helpfully notes that if she vomits after drinking either, she's already pregnant. No kidding. Drinking mouse poop beer would make anyone vomit. Ancient Greece gave us democracy, philosophy, and some truly bizarre bedroom customs. Let's start with the Spartan wedding night. Brides had their heads completely shaved, dressed in men's clothing, and left alone in a dark room. Their husband would sneak in like a thief, quickly do the deed, then immediately return to the barracks to sleep with his fellow soldiers. This could go on for years. Some couples had multiple children before the husband ever saw his wife in daylight or women's clothing. But here's the absolutely insane part. In Athens, the gymnasiums where men exercised naked, covered in olive oil, were also social clubs. Men discussed philosophy, politics, and often engaged in romantic relationships, all while their wives stayed home, often forming relationships with each other, since they rarely saw their husbands. The Greeks even had a specific position called intercrural sex, between the thighs, considered more socially acceptable because it avoided certain taboos. Diagrams survive on pottery. Imagine being an archaeologist, and your big find is essentially ancient Greek instructional pornography. The Spartans had an even weirder practice: wife sharing, ushex, or polyandria. If an older man had a young wife, he was expected to invite a younger, stronger man to sleep with her to produce better offspring. The old husband would literally interview candidates like a job application. Tell me about your battlefield experience and your family's history of tall children. One Spartan king, Ariston, even borrowed his best friend's wife, the most beautiful woman in Sparta. When she had a baby, both men claimed paternity, settling it with a wrestling match. The friend won, but they continued sharing her anyway, because, as Ariston put it, Sparta needs strong children more than I need exclusive bedroom rights. Greek symposiums, those famous philosophical drinking parties, had a post-dinner ritual called the kakum, komos chosao, where guests would parade naked through the streets to the house of whoever they wanted to seduce. They'd sing obscene songs and perform athletic feats. One Athenian writer describes 14 naked philosophers showing up at his door at 2 a.m., doing handstands and reciting erotic poetry about figs. His wife allegedly poured a chamber pot on them from the window, considered a polite way of saying, "not interested." But the most bizarre Greek practice was the Athenian Adonia festival. Women would climb onto their rooftops and create Adonis gardens, quick-growing plants in broken pots that would sprout and die within days, symbolizing Adonis's brief life. During this festival, women would openly mourn, tear their clothes, and then engage in ritual orgies on the rooftops while their husbands were locked out of the house. Men would gather in the streets below, playing music and trying to catch glimpses. One Athenian husband bitterly complained to the city council that his wife threw clay pots at him when he tried to climb up, and the neighbor women cheered her on while doing unspeakable things with vegetables. The council's response? Basically, it's once a year. Deal with it. Now, here's a problem that affected 90% of humanity for most of history: the Jet one-room house. Whether you were a medieval peasant, a colonial farmer, or an ancient Roman pleb, your entire family lived in one room. This meant intimacy happened while your children slept inches away. Your in-laws were right there. Sometimes even the farm animals were in the corner. Medieval peasants developed a complex system of coughs, snores, and turned backs to signal, "We're not listening." Children were taught from an early age to pretend to be asleep when the bed started creaking. One historian found a diary from 1652 where a man complained that his mother-in-law would provide helpful commentary during intimate moments with his wife. In ancient Rome's insulae, apartment buildings, the walls were so thin that everyone knew everyone else's business. Juvenal, a Roman poet, wrote about hearing his upstairs neighbors so clearly he could tell you exactly what positions they favored. Some cultures developed sex furniture specifically for this problem. The Chinese had the stao love chair. a chair with very quiet joints that wouldn't wake the family. Vikings had special marriage beds with thick curtains, creating a tiny private room within the room. The situation was so universal that different cultures developed elaborate etiquette around ignoring what you heard. In medieval France, there was a saying, "The straw has no ears," meaning everyone in the shared sleeping area would pretend the straw mattresses made them deaf to nighttime activities. One French peasant's diary from 1389 describes his family of 12 all sleeping in the same room. When his eldest son married, they hung a single cloth between the newlyweds' corner and the rest of the family. The diarist notes, "We sang loudly during dinner for the first month to give them courage." Japanese families in the Edo period had perhaps the most elegant solution: the Miito Yobai system. Young men would silently sneak into houses at night and slip into bed with unmarried daughters with the full knowledge of the parents, who would pretend to be asleep. If the daughter accepted him, he'd stay. If not, she'd pinch him, and he'd leave just as silently. Parents judged the man's suitability by how quietly he could navigate their house in the dark. One father wrote he deliberately left pottery near his daughter's futon to test suitors' stealth. If they break nothing, they may be worthy. Young Taro destroyed 3 vases and stepped on the cat. He is not welcome back. But perhaps the most creative solution came from medieval Ireland. Bundling bags with bells. These were special sleeping bags for unmarried couples, with small bells sewn all around them. Any excessive movement would create a racket, waking the entire household. One Irish chronicle mentions a particularly determined couple who learned to move so slowly they could be intimate without ringing a single bell, a process that apparently took 4 hours. The girl's father was so impressed by the young man's patience and determination that he immediately approved the marriage, saying, "Any lad with that much self-control will make a fine husband." Here's something that'll make you grateful for modern privacy. Witness requirements for consummation. In medieval Europe, especially among nobility, consummation had to be verified. This meant witnesses, usually high-ranking nobles or clergy, would either stand behind a curtain listening, check the bed sheets afterward, or, and this is the worst, actually watch. When Prince Arthur married Catherine of Aragon in 1501, 7 witnesses stood in the bedroom to confirm consummation. The 15-year-old prince reportedly emerged and loudly declared, "Bring me a cup of ale, for I have been this night in the midst of Spain." Spoiler: historians think he was lying. In France, it was even worse. The entire court would escort the couple to bed, check they were both naked, then draw the curtains and wait outside. They'd return in the morning to inspect the sheets for evidence. Marie Antoinette had to endure this with dozens of French nobles essentially grading her wedding night performance. The witness tradition reached peak insanity with the marriage of Margaret of Burgundy to Louis. Next in line for the French throne in 1305. Not only did 12 nobles watch the consummation, but they had a scoring system. They rated the groom's performance on vigor, duration, and probable success of conception. The scores were recorded in official court records. Louis apparently scored poorly in duration, but made up for it in vigor, earning a satisfactory with room for improvement rating. The document still exists in the French National Archives, complete with helpful suggestions from the Duke of Orleans about pacing. In some cases, when the groom was too young or too nervous, they had professional assistance. When Charles II of Spain married Marie-Louise of Orleans, he was so sickly and inexperienced that the court physician used puppets to explain the process. When that failed, they brought in palace servants to demonstrate behind a semi-transparent screen. The poor king was so traumatized, he didn't attempt consummation for another 3 months. When he finally did, 14 courtiers were present to cheer him on. One witness wrote, His Majesty required considerable encouragement and 2 glasses of fortified wine. The Byzantine Empire took things to another level with the virginity trial. Before royal weddings, the bride was examined by a panel of elderly women to confirm her virginity. Then, immediately after the wedding night, the same panel examined her again to confirm consummation had occurred. They had a checklist of physical signs, which they announced publicly to the court. One Byzantine princess, Theodora, apparently failed the second examination, leading to a 3-day theological debate about whether vigorous horseback riding could produce similar physical effects. The panel eventually decided she had definitely been riding something, and the marriage was declared valid. Before we wrap up, let's talk about ancient birth control, which ranged from ineffective to actively dangerous. Romans believed wearing a cat's liver in a tube on your left foot would prevent pregnancy. Ancient Greeks thought sneezing after sex would work. It doesn't. But the absolute wildest method comes from medieval Europe. Weasel testicles. Women would wear dried weasel testicles around their neck or thigh as contraception. The Trotula, a medieval medical text, recommended this, along with wearing a donkey's hoof or a child's tooth. One method involved a woman spitting 3 times into a frog's mouth after intercourse. But perhaps the most tragic was the use of Imaqtine mercury. In ancient China, women would drink liquid mercury, which did prevent pregnancy, by slowly poisoning them to death. The ancient world had some absolutely bonkers theories about how conception worked, leading to even more insane contraception methods. Aristotle believed women were just incubators for male seed, so Greek women would try to make themselves inhospitable by eating hot foods and taking scalding baths. One Greek physician recommended jumping backwards 7 times after intercourse while sneezing and shouting, "Not today." He claimed a 60% success rate, though his sample size was suspicious since it was just his wife, who was probably already infertile from all the jumping. Medieval Europeans believed conception required simultaneous orgasm. So, one contraception method was simply ensuring the woman didn't enjoy herself, which, given medieval bedroom practices, probably wasn't that difficult. Some women wore amulets made from a mule's earwax mixed with mare's urine, believing it would make them temporarily sterile. The smell alone probably worked as contraception by keeping everyone at least 10 feet away. But the Romans win the prize for most disgusting method with their use of drathidii, gladiator, blood. Women would drink the blood of defeated gladiators, believing the warrior essence would fight off incoming sperm like tiny soldiers. Some entrepreneurial gladiators started selling their blood as premium contraception, claiming blood from victories was more effective than blood from defeats. One Roman merchant's wife reportedly spent a fortune on championship blood from a gladiator who'd won 20 fights, only to get pregnant anyway. She sued the gladiator for false advertising. The case went all the way to the Roman Senate, who ruled that blood efficacy could not be legally guaranteed. So there you have it, the absolutely insane world of ancient intimacy, where privacy was a myth, lettuce was an aphrodisiac, and your mother-in-law might be offering tips 3 feet away. The next time you're frustrated with modern dating, just remember, at least you don't have to wear a giant nightgown with a hole in it, get whipped by naked men covered in goat blood, or have your wedding night graded by a panel of nobles. Our ancestors managed to keep humanity going despite bundling boards, one-room houses, and the constant presence of disapproving relatives. If they could figure out romance under those conditions, maybe there's hope for all of us. No crocodile dung required. What's the weirdest historical bedroom fact you've ever heard? Let me know in the comments below if you can type through the secondhand embarrassment. And if you enjoyed this dive into history's most awkward moments, make sure to subscribe for more insane historical facts your teachers definitely didn't tell you about. Next week, we're exploring the absolutely revolting beauty standards of ancient times, including why Romans used gladiator sweat as perfume. Yes, really. Until then, remember, no matter how awkward your love life might be, at least you don't need congressional witnesses.